The tray slipped from her trembling hands, crashing onto the floor with a sharp clang that made every head in the restaurant turn. Plates shattered, soup spilled across the polished tiles, and a few cruel chuckles rose from one corner of the room. For Amelia, it was more than just broken dishes. It was the sound of her spirit cracking under the weight of humiliation. She had been enduring mocking comments, lingering stares, and crude remarks from a group of rowdy customers all night. But now, with their laughter echoing in her ears, it felt unbearable. Her eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall, because in that moment, crying in front of them would have felt like surrender. Sparkles, before we dive deeper, if you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in stories that remind us of the good still left in this world, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel Kindness Tales. Your support helps us spread more heart-touching stories like this one. Amelia bent to pick up the broken pieces, her hands trembling, not just from the sharp edges of the glass, but from the voices jeering above her. "Clumsy girl," one of the men sneered, deliberately loud enough for everyone to hear. Another leaned back in his chair, smirking. "Maybe if you smiled more, you wouldn't mess up so much." Their words sliced through her already fragile self-esteem, reminding her of how invisible and powerless she often felt. She wanted to vanish, to slip away unnoticed into a quiet corner of the world where nobody judged her for every mistake. Her manager gave her a hard look from the counter, one that said she had no choice but to plaster on a polite smile and return to work. Quitting wasn't an option. Rent was due, bills stacked higher each month, and her younger brother depended on her to put food on the table. So she straightened her back, blinked away her tears, and continued serving, though her heart grew heavier with every step. In a far corner of the restaurant sat a man, quietly observing. Unlike the others, his gaze wasn't filled with mockery or judgment. He noticed how Amelia forced herself to keep moving, even when her hands shook as she set down glasses, even when her eyes glistened with unshed tears. He noticed the way she offered kindness to customers who gave her none in return, a strength most overlooked. His name was Ethan Hartwell, a billionaire known to the world for his wealth and business empire. But in that dimly lit restaurant, he was simply a man witnessing a scene that stirred something deep inside him. Ethan had built his fortune from the ground up. He knew what it meant to be underestimated, to feel small, to be dismissed by those who thought themselves more powerful. Seeing Amelia's quiet endurance, the way she swallowed her pride to keep going, reminded him of his own battles, except she was fighting hers without the luxury of resources or influence. And in that instant, he knew he couldn't just sit back and watch cruelty unfold. The night dragged on, with Amelia avoiding the cruel table as much as possible, praying for their check to come soon. But fate wasn't merciful. As she placed a plate of food on their table, one of the men deliberately brushed her hand, smirking when she recoiled. "Relax, sweetheart. It's just a touch," he said, making the others laugh again. Her stomach churned, but she forced a tight smile, willing herself not to break. She turned quickly, desperate to leave, when suddenly another voice, calm, firm, and commanding, cut through the noise. "That's enough." The restaurant fell silent. Ethan Hartwell rose from his table, his presence immediately commanding attention. He walked over, his tall frame and sharp eyes radiating authority. The men who had moments ago felt bold now shrank under his gaze, their laughter dying in their throats. "Harassing staff isn't just inappropriate," he said, his voice low but powerful. "It's disgraceful. If you can't treat people with respect, you don't deserve to be here." The group shifted uncomfortably, their bravado crumbling. With one icy glance, Ethan had stripped away their arrogance, leaving them exposed and ashamed. Amelia stood frozen, her breath caught in her chest. No one had ever stood up for her like that. Not at work, not anywhere. For so long, she had felt invisible, fighting silent battles that no one seemed to notice. But here was this stranger, someone powerful and intimidating, choosing to defend her when he had nothing to gain. Her heart pounded, not out of fear, but out of an overwhelming rush of gratitude and disbelief. The men muttered excuses, hurriedly throwing money onto the table before leaving in a fluster. The restaurant slowly returned to its rhythm, though a hushed awe lingered in the air. Ethan turned to Amelia, his expression softening as he said quietly, "No one should have to endure what you just did." For the first time that night, she allowed her tears to fall, not from humiliation, but from relief. After her shift, Amelia found him waiting outside, leaning casually against a sleek black car that looked as if it belonged in another world far from hers. She hesitated, unsure if she should approach, but he smiled gently, putting her at ease. He told her his name, though she didn't realize until later who he really was. To her, he was just Ethan, the kind stranger who had given her dignity back when she thought it was lost. They talked for hours. Amelia found herself opening up about her struggles, the endless bills, her brother's education, the way she often felt invisible in a world that only seemed to value wealth and beauty. She confessed that she sometimes wondered if kindness even existed anymore, or if people were simply too busy to care. Ethan listened, truly listened, his eyes never leaving hers. And when he finally spoke, his words carried a weight that stayed with her long after that night. "You are stronger than you realize," he told her. "Kindness does exist, but sometimes it takes just one person to remind the world of it. Tonight, you reminded me." Days turned into weeks, and though their worlds were vastly different, Ethan and Amelia crossed paths again. He began visiting the restaurant more often, not as a billionaire making headlines, but as a man who genuinely cared. He left generous tips, but more importantly, he offered words of encouragement, always reminding her that her worth wasn't defined by her struggles. Slowly, Amelia began to believe it. One evening, after another long shift, Ethan handed her an envelope. Inside was a scholarship fund in her name, enough to cover her brother's education and ease the crushing weight of her financial burden. Amelia's knees went weak, tears spilling freely as she whispered that she could never repay him. Ethan only smiled and said, "Just promise me you'll keep believing in kindness, and pass it on when you can." And she did. Amelia began to find her voice again. She stood taller at work, no longer shrinking under the harshness of customers. She saved carefully, eventually leaving the restaurant to pursue her dream of studying hospitality management. Every step forward carried the memory of Ethan's kindness, the reminder that even in the darkest nights, one act of compassion could restore faith in humanity. Years later, Amelia would look back on that night, not as the evening she broke under cruelty, but as the night her life changed forever. A billionaire's kindness had lifted her from despair, showing her that dignity, hope, and faith in humanity could be restored with a single choice to stand up for what is right. And in her own way, Amelia carried that torch forward, helping others, offering compassion, and becoming the kind of person she once so desperately needed. Sparkles, if this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to Kindness Tales. Your support helps us bring more true-to-life stories of kindness and hope to the world. Love letter special request. Comment below what kindness means to you. Your words might inspire someone who needs it today. And so, Amelia's story reminds us all. Sometimes it takes just one person's courage to restore another's faith. And when kindness is passed on, it becomes a chain of light that can change the world one heart at a time.